you will probably get a thing asking you if it's okay. All right. So welcome everyone. We're excited to be here. We're going to delve into the science of reading a little bit generally and start to focus in on decoding and encoding. Although in our preparation for this presentation, we realized that we start off kind of general in this session, and we're going to build a little bit from Dr. Philippakos's session last week with the plan of diving a little deeper into some of the sub-skills or components of literacy learning next week in our second session. So just kind of thinking about the context here and what we're planning to do. My name's Nora Vines. I'm literacy studies faculty and elementary education faculty here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And prior to this part of my life, I was a kindergarten and first grade teacher in Western North Carolina, where I also completed my reading specialist endorsement and an EDD in education leadership with a focus in literacy studies. And my colleague, Jennifer Jordan.
And I'm Jennifer Jordan, and I also teach literacy and elementary courses here at UT. This is my 11th year as a clinical associate professor. I went through the program here at UT, my undergrad. I did my master's degree here, and then I went off and taught first grade and fourth grade in Chattanooga and in Knox County, and then came back and got my PhD in literacy studies at UT, and then was had the opportunity to stay, and so I did, and work closely with Dr. Vines. We co-teach a lot and we present a lot, so we'll probably tell some jokes and no one will laugh except for each other, and that's fine because that's just who we are.
And if we make fun of each other, it's all in good fun.
Yes.
A lot of times people are like, oh, what'd you just say to her? And we're like, it's fine. All right, so just to kind of get us started, get our brains warmed up and thinking about the content of what we're going to talk about here and how it applies or connects to what you do currently in your capacity as an educator, just thinking about what you know about decoding. And that's really general and broad, and that's fine. But what do you know about decoding? What do you know about encoding? Maybe even thinking about how you teach your students to decode and encode, what that looks like for you. What is appropriate wait time here? I'm just kind of thinking and jotting. We'll return to this question at the end, and hopefully there's even more robust of putting pen to paper once we've talked through. And so just kind of an overview here of some what we thought would be key concepts for this presentation and our particular focus. And we know that there's been a lot of conversation around this terminology, this idea of the science of reading. So we kind of wanted to unpack that and acknowledge what many voices in our field and related fields think of the science of reading. And we're really grounding that and this idea of successful instruction that includes systematic and explicit instruction related to phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary fluency, and comprehension. So we're going back to, I guess, back to those 5 pillars of reading from the National Reading Panel report as we reconnect with how important and crucial they are for all literacy learners. And then thinking about phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, automatic word recognition, encoding, and comprehension, and not necessarily to lay those out as they develop or to be thought of in a linear manner, because we know that that's not necessarily true. They all feed each other, if you will. But, you know, we stole this kind of conceptualization, or not stole it, we borrowed it from Timothy Rosinski, and we've linked and added a blog post that he wrote where we felt like he explained the science of reading really well, but also while acknowledging the art of reading. And so we hope to kind of lay the groundwork here, thinking about the scientific research, evidence based piece of literacy acquisition, literacy development, literacy assessment, and then thinking in terms of where the artistic piece kind of comes in with instruction. And again, we'll dive deeper into that next week. And just to kind of give us a framework here, because we feel like it's really important to ground our thinking, our assessment, and our teaching um, in in the work of folks here. So, in Tennessee and in Knox County, where we are, the simple view of reading has been really heavily focused on, and we want to acknowledge that. Thinking about how decoding and language comprehension as larger umbrellas, if you will, work together to result in making meaning for what we're reading or what we're engaging with as far as text goes. Um, and really, we're focusing more here on that decoding piece in this presentation. And then also, and this builds on the work of Dr. Philippakos from last week as well, and a framework that we use really heavily in most of our teaching, if not all of our teaching and literacy courses here at UT. And I'm also a very visual person, so this model just really works for me, and it works for me really well. And thinking about the work of Michael McKenna and colleagues, thinking about reading comprehension, and not just the understanding, but the ability to take the knowledge that we've gained from text and apply it elsewhere and create and generate new things with it too. And thinking back along these pathways that really, again, feed into what we think of as reading comprehension. And we've just kind of, sorry, I can't see my visual. That's and so thinking about reading comprehension there. And again, we're really going to focus here on pathway one, thinking about what those skills and components leading to automatic word recognition, which really is the cornerstone of fluent and efficient reading. And so that's what we're going to focus on here. And putting this presentation together, I'm always struck by how, I don't want to say dated, let's say historic, how rooted in history so much of what we do is, and just being really aware and cognizant of some of the work of others that have built on and gotten us to where we are here, and just thinking about the work of Marilyn Adams and others. She's not the only person to say this and come to this conclusion, but really thinking about, if we have 100% of our brain's energy, right, that we need as much of it free from what Chaw calls being glued to print, so that we can engage with those meaning making aspects and thinking about text structures and background knowledge and questioning the author and thinking about what our specific and general purposes are for engaging with a text. And in being able to do that, our print level skill really has to be automatic. It almost has to be effortless, so that we can take what we're trying to get from the page, if you will. And so really thinking about the focus of our presentation and what we're talking about here, and thinking about how decoding develops and how encoding develops, if you will. And again, building on the work of so many others, it's really helpful, again, to look and see how development in decoding, taking individual words off of the page, really aligns with the production of isolated words. And so you can kind of, look here and see as a child's perception or a reader's perception of a written word evolves, it develops, if you will, and then also how words would be represented across a developmental continuum or progression in writing. And again, these stages and this development really aligns with Chaul, again, thinking about this really important time in first, second, and third grade where we're making that transition from really being glued to print and having to effortfully work through what's on the page so that we can then make meaning, as opposed to being unglued from print effortlessly, automatically, efficiently, and accurately taking what's on the page so that more mental capacity, if you will, is left over for that meaning making. And I'm gonna give you a break from my voice and let Jennifer take us through some assessment here.
So if you buy what Nora just said and you believe that explicit instruction and decoding and phonemic awareness and all of those practices and skills and strategies are important to get to that point where you do have cognitive space to be, comprehend, work on your fluency, and move into other areas of literacy, then the first step in that is going to obviously be assessment, which, we would argue is always the first step in any instruction, right? We need to know where our students are. And not only do assessments tell us where our students are, but we're going to run through some different ones today, and they're actually going to guide, hopefully, our thinking into what exactly do we mean by teaching letter recognition and phonics and phonemic awareness. What should we focus on? And so there's a lot of different assessments out there. We don't have time in this session to go into all of them. We're going to go ahead and focus mainly on the two texts on the left, Assessment for Reading Instruction and Kindergarten Literacy, just as two examples. Obviously, we know that certain school systems are going to dictate which assessments can be used in particular situations and particular grades, depending on if it's diagnostic or if it's, more formative or informative. And so, we understand that sometimes we don't have control over these. So these have been chosen as just examples of possible assessments to run us through the thinking, with the knowledge that these may not be the ones that you're familiar with. So if we talk about phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, we're talking about the ideas of identifying rhyme, identifying blending and segmentation. And you can see some examples here from several different texts, looking at the idea of, can a child rhyme, with the thought that if they can pick two words that rhyme, they're starting to understand the idea of onset and rhyme and what that means, as we then think about moving towards encoding, right? That connection that eventually, once they start understanding, okay, if I have a bunch of words that are in the at family and I know they all rhyme with each other, then they're probably going to be spelled the same or at least similar, and building that knowledge. When we talk about blending and segmentation, there's a lot of different levels to that. And so, we can think about it at a very small level with the phoneme, right? So in this example, we have the word big and, the sounds that make up the word, b-ig, and then can we blend those together? And then later on, the next step would be, then can you take them apart? If I say the word big, can you take them apart? Once students have an understanding of that, they tend to move on to onset and rhyme. That's where you think about rhyming words. Then you've seen where teachers teach syllables, where they're clapping out the syllables. And then even thinking about words that we can put together, maybe as compound words. So you can think about phonemic awareness as all being on a continuum. Through these assessments, you can find out where students are on this continuum. And like Dr. Vine said, it's not as cut and dry as this, right? It doesn't always work this way for all students. You may have a student who really struggles with onset and rhyme, but they can do syllables and they can do compound words. And that's really where you get the information as to what do I need to focus on? Where does the instruction need to be? Or the professional decision making to say, okay, this is a process. If they can do the next step, do they really need to do the previous one if it's not really seeming to hinder their ability to start thinking about the sounds and syllables and whatnot that are in words? Another assessment that is also part of the kindergarten literacy is obviously the letter sound identification. So, you think of phonemic awareness as just sounds, right? So we haven't connected anything to the graphemes, the actual letters yet. We're just listening to what we hear. And then making that connection that, oh, all those sounds that we're hearing actually correspond to these crazy squiggly lines that are showing up on paper. And again, it's that idea of if you use these assessments and you see where they're struggling, it could be that they're struggling with identifying the letter, or it could be that they're struggling hearing the sound, right? And so there's a lot of information that you can gather from these assessments that are going to indicate what your next steps are. So do they need to go back and do some more phonemic awareness activities because they're not hearing the B sound? Or do we need to practice with the shape of what that looks like? Especially those confusing letters like B and D and P and Q that they tend to reverse and put upside down. Is it an issue of handwriting? There's so many pieces that go into it. And what's really important, and I hope one thing that you guys take from today is the idea that you're given these assessments and they're research-based and they're great assessments, but they don't mean anything if you can't analyze what the assessment is telling you, right? So if I give this assessment and it seems like a really cut and dry assessment, right? It's just, do you know the letters and do you know the sounds they make? But there can be a multitude of reasons why a student struggles on these letters and sounds. And so it's that idea of digging a little deeper to figure out what exactly is the reason so that then you can cater your instruction for each student.
And that's a really important point too, Jennifer. And I'm going to jump in for a second, which kind of ties back to the use of the cognitive model here and thinking about, in a lot of ways we can assess the outcome, but what is that underlying issue, which is where all of these assessments come into play, and why we feel like it's really important to start breaking these pieces down before we get into what works for instruction and all of that. Because if we don't have the capacity or the knowledge of what we are actually assessing, there's no way that we can match students with effective and appropriate instruction, no matter which tier we're trying to target.
So then another level of this idea of decoding is obviously getting to word recognition, right? So let's say we've gone through the process. You've got a student who seem to do really well with phonemic awareness. They're understanding the connection between letters and the sounds that they make, and they're starting to build words. And so we begin to test students on their ability to quickly recognize words. Now, there's obviously a difference between the ways in which students recognize high frequency or sight words versus a regularly decoded word. So for instance, if I'm looking at this first list here that comes from Morris, you know, it's got the word for number 2 is cat. That's a pretty regular word. It's decoded pretty easily. And so if your student can decode that word, you can possibly make the connection that, yes, they understand that one-to-one correspondence between letters and sounds. Whereas if I look at, I should have picked one out earlier. Let's see here. The word said for 13. That's not a regularly decoded word, right? That's a word that you're really going to expect students just to memorize over time based on their exposure to print. So when you're thinking about your different assessments that you're going to use, you need to know whether or not, do you have an assessment that's going to have a mix of those? Or is it going to be more like, you know, the words we see on the right-hand side, like sat and pot and beg, words that are more regularly decoded? I'll always remember, and you know, you look back at your teaching and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, like why, like why was I allowed to be in the classroom at that point? Like I shouldn't have been there. I was doing great things, but there was this one day where the students came back for reading group and they were my, you know, on level kids. And I gave them the book to read. And we, you know, they had their little phones, their little phonics phones, and they weren't reading. And I was like, I was getting so frustrated with them because I was like, you're not trying today. You're not trying. And I just finally was like, just go back to your seats, you know, just, I'm done with you. And then I started looking at the book and I was like, okay, this book is way too hard. You know, even though that the reading series told me that if they could read the book last week, they can read this book. I didn't know that I was supposed to actually look and see how many irregularly spelled words there were, and the fact that they didn't have the skills to read those words. And so I will say the next day, actually, I think it was later on in the day when I figured it out, I pulled them back and I said, they gave us the wrong book. This was not your fault. They, you know, I was like, it didn't blame it on myself. I was like, the book people, they gave you the wrong book. But again, it's that knowledge. Like I didn't have the knowledge to know that this was an inappropriate text for them to be in because I didn't really understand the development of that information. So I had given them a word recognition, you know, screener. I knew they were in the middle group, but then when it came to the nuance of it, that's where the problem started happening. So just be thinking about, you know, these types of assessments. You need to look more closely at what kinds of words they have in them. Are they nonsense words versus actual, you know, words from the English language? You know, again, I'm going to tell another quick story and then I'll be done, Nora. One of my friends right now, she's got, her son is in 4th grade and he's in tier 3, and she sent me his report and he does fine decoding regular words, but then he failed the decoding word recognition list because he got all of the nonsense words incorrect, because he changed, when I saw what he did and what he said, he changed them all to actual words. Did he not understand the assessment? Did he not understand that that was possible? You know, was it not explained well? Or is that just the way that his brain thinks, is that, oh, it doesn't sound right. I've never heard this word before. So just trying to dig a little deeper and thinking about, you know, it's not just the answer's right or wrong, but why? What is the background story to help inform us as to what we need to, like Nora said, explicitly teach as far as phonics goes and decoding. And that's going to be different for every kid, obviously. You got 20 kids in a class and they're all going to be different.
I think it's really important too to think about, like Jennifer's saying too, is really paying attention to what kiddos are doing during different types of assessments, depending on the purpose of the assessment, of course, too, and really thinking about and paying attention to the types of strategies that they're using for decoding, or, you know, for figuring out what this word says. You know, are they wildly guessing? Are they using the initial the initial consonant? Are they trying to read by analogy? Are they filling in the gaps? You know, so that can really help us not only determine where they are, but what they know, but then also what can we do with our instruction to build on that, to move their development and their acquisition along.
And then we can think about too, you know, kind of after we've done this word recognition and there's, you know, we want to dig a little deeper, right? We want to know what phonics patterns, what sounds do they know, which ones are they still struggling with? And when we think about this on a developmental trajectory, you know, we know that in general, this is the order on the left-hand side that students are generally exposed to these spellings and letter combinations, as well as generally developmentally how they learn them. It's also how often they show up in books, right? So the word boil doesn't show up that much unless you're maybe reading a recipe book or something like that. So again, thinking about just drilling down and getting more information. You know, if you have a student who is taking this informal phonics inventory and, you know, they do great with the consonant sounds, the consonant digraphs, the beginning consonant blends, final consonant blends are fine, short vowels are good. Oh my gosh, when we get to long vowel digraphs, they just really, really struggle. Well, I don't think I would teach a lesson and be like, well, today, guys, we're going to do long vowel digraphs. You know, I don't know. I mean, there's some different, you know, different views out there on whether you should name it, whether you shouldn't. I don't see a reason why you can't, but I don't know that you need to say it 1,000 times and they have to memorize it and sing a song about it. But, you know, if that's what you're focusing on, you need to know what a digraph is. Like, you need to know what is the difference between a digraph and a blend, right? What's a consonant blend? What is a consonant digraph? You know, these are all important things as a teacher. You need to know what these are so that you can easily identify through observation as you're watching a student read the types of words they're getting stuck on, or as we move into encoding, the patterns that they're struggling with, you know, so that you can make that, you can really hone in on that one piece of where they are. So just knowing this information, I think is something that, again, I'm not sure that I knew very much about all of this. I would just read the reading teacher's manual and be like, oh, this week we're doing digraphs. And then I'd look at the words and be like, oh, I know what a digraph is now that I look at it. It must be the, you know, the TH, the SH and the CH, but I didn't really have a big, broad understanding of how all this stuff builds. And so thinking about, you know, your students and where's their entry point to this, right? So if you give this phonics inventory or whatever assessment comes with that your county asks you to give, and then you still just go and teach everyone R controlled vowels at the same time, you know, that's fine because it's on level, right? It's what students should be learning. But then also, if there's gaps, students need to be filled. That's what needs to be focused on. Or vice versa, you've got students who are more advanced and they're ready to move on to some other different elements.
And I'm going to pop in for a second because we do have a couple of resources we wanted to share with folks too. So not this edition because I'm a little older, but the speech to print, Louisa Motz's text, and it's in its second edition now, was really helpful for me as a classroom teacher in understanding a lot of these concepts and a lot of what I feel like is teacher content knowledge in order to support students in their literacy learning in a way that, like Jennifer's explaining.
And we're not going to spend too much time on this slide just because it is the focus of next week. But just thinking about as we are moving from the decoding, now we're encoding. So we're actually writing down the knowledge that we have, right? And thinking about how the reading and the writing, you know, are very similar in the way, in their understandings, right? So tend to be able to write sounds that, you know, you're able to make those connections. So a type of spelling inventory, this one is the Words Their Way, as well as the kindergarten literacy. But even through this, you can tell, you can assess a student's phonemic awareness, right? Are they able to hear all the different sounds in the word? The alphabetic principle, are they able to connect the sound they're hearing to the correct grapheme, the correct letter of the alphabet? And then their orthographic knowledge, which is their understanding of spelling patterns. And in my thinking, I'm kind of, and we'll get into this more next week, I see orthographic patterns as being the same as, in a lot of ways, as phonics patterns. So, you know, we just talked about consonant digraphs. Well, you're going to now spell them. There's going to be certain spelling patterns for those consonant digraphs. There's only going to be a certain number of digraphs and ways of spelling it. So making those connections between the two, if they're struggling with those digraphs in their spelling, it's something to look at, to think about, well, are they struggling with it in their reading as well? But we'll get into a lot more of this next week.
All right. And so really just kind of connecting all of what we've talked about so far to actual contextual reading. And we'll talk a little bit about contextual writing as well. And we just have two examples of informal reading inventories. There are tons out there. They are all organized very similarly and measure similar skills and sets of knowledge as well. But we really want to emphasize and think about how it's very important that kids learn these skills and learn how to apply those skills in contextual reading and writing. I think in the early grades, in a lot of ways, it's easier to assess, or not just early grades, but in earlier development. It's easier to assess some of these print level skills because we can see them. They're concrete. We can watch kids do them. We can listen to them do them in a way that makes it a little easier for us to pinpoint if we're effectively assessing where to teach and where those entry points are for instruction. When we start thinking about differentiation. But we really want to be sure, as is appropriate, and when kids are ready for it, that we're checking that they are transferring that knowledge and those skills to real reading and writing. And I was talking to Jennifer earlier today, so my 5-year-old is in that magical place where he's there, like he's right on the precipice of like reading. And so we've been doing a lot of word work and a lot of letter recognition, and he knows his letters and he knows his letter sounds. And so we've started to delve into some letter sound matching, and so he can really help me generate words, and we can do a lot of different things where we're working with the at family. And so he can help me make cat into hat into sat into fat, right? And then he can read those words down the list and he knows those words, and we'll put them on cards and all those things. But then if I put a book in front of him, he is not 100% yet, right? He's not quite there to where he knows that cat on our little list that we've made is cat in his book. And so we're working to make that transfer from this is what we're learning here in isolation, but also let's make sure that we're practicing and learning how to do it in context too. And then the same is true for contextual writing as well. And there are so many ways and things to measure and to assess and evaluate when it comes to writing. Dr. Philippakis has amazing and extensive work in this area. So we just wanted to pop up some things here, but the state of Tennessee has writing rubrics, all these things. But again, making sure that we're seeing what students are able to do and what we're teaching them and what they're practicing in isolation, but seeing that in authentic and real writing as well. So we want to see it everywhere. And then like we keep saying, because we're just going to keep advertising and we're going to get people into our sessions, and we're going to hook you with this is what's to come, right? This is a pretty well-known book in Tennessee, Know Better, Do Better by the Liebens. And so Jennifer and I wanted to, again, kind of make the point that all students deserve really effective and explicit instruction at tier one, right? And they deserve and need research-based programs and materials that the teacher can deliver so that everyone is getting exposure and practice and instruction on grade level with what's expected there. And we put the copy of this book here because we feel like that they have done a really nice job of giving a really good overview of what that looks like, of what solid tier one instruction looks like. And they've even given recommendations of some curricular materials that are published and available, and definitely used in Tennessee, as does the What Works Clearinghouse, has great examples there as well. And then thinking about using the assessments we've talked about or similar assessments and determining what students need at tier two, what these interventions look like across tiers, and being sure that we're focusing our instruction across tiers to what individuals and groups of students need based on the assessments and the evaluations that we have made using that data and our knowledge of literacy acquisition and development. Um, and then also, we have all the caveats. And then also being sure that that differentiation shows up across all groups of students in our classrooms. So, being sure that we're focused on our students who are on grade level, being sure we're focused on our students who are striving to get to grade level, and focused on our students who are exceeding grade level expectations, and being sure that no matter where they are in their development and acquisition, that they're getting that baseline. This is what everybody needs and what's going to get us there, but also what's going to take us from where we are to where we all deserve to be. More to come next week. Am I still, I can't remember now. Okay. I was like, and then this is where I forget which slides, but Zoe promised me we could edit that out. My bumbles can be edited out. And so we just kind of want to reiterate our thinking and our stance as far as the state of literacy instruction right now, just in the world generally. But we really do believe that there are three keys to effective instruction, right? You, us, teachers. And we really believe that when teachers have this deep knowledge of literacy development, acquisition, and assessment, and we have the capacity to build and grow that knowledge. That's part of why we're here, is to continue our knowledge building, but also to support folks who are interested in that. That's the really exciting news, is we can do that and we can learn it. And we feel like the second key are high quality materials, right? Evidence-based practices. And we have a link here to What Works Clearinghouse, and I know Dr. Philippakos talked about that last week as well. The not so good news there is sometimes teachers and even administrators don't have input into what the required instructional materials may be. That may come from the state level, the district level, the school level, or it may just be what is left over from the budget and you've had it for 12 years. I don't know. So that's out of our hands. But with, again, that knowledge, Jennifer and I really believe that if teachers know this literacy stuff, that no matter what materials they're given, they can make it work. And then that integration of authentic tasks, right? So that explicit instruction married with the opportunities to practice reading and writing in and out of context.
And just to kind of bring it all, wrap it all up and bring it all together, is just to be thinking about that reciprocal relationship between reading and writing. So decoding, encoding, in-text reading, writing, a persuasive piece, or whatever the skill is. There really is a lot of research out there that shows that one obviously influences the other, one supports the other. So this idea that I hear floating out there a little bit, I think it's kind of been squelched. I'm not sure, I feel like it's not the rhetoric that's being used, but for a little while there, I kept on hearing science of reading is decoding. It's just decoding. It's all about decoding. We just need to explicitly have these kids decode. And it's important to explicitly teach these kids how to decode, but without the other piece, without the writing piece to support it, teachers are just kind of shooting themselves in the foot, right? So they're not going to be able to make as much progress. The students are not going to be able to make as much progress if you're only doing one without the other. And so taking a large chunk of time out of the school day just to work on out of text, word lists, decoding, like Nora's doing flashcards with George, that's great, but it's got to have that connection piece too, so that George can see what the purpose is, as well as begin to authentically practice with it and begin writing what he, using his text as like an anchor, a model text, and writing with that. Thinking about the importance of there being the productive as well as the receptive side of each of them. And if you want to go to the next slide, Nora, I think that we've got a quick little visual. It's a lot on the slide, but we can go through the Tennessee literacy standards, and I would imagine states as well, and see that there really is an alignment between the reading and the writing standards. This is second grade, for example, and if you look at it, it's like, well, you're going to write a cohesive piece with development, organization, and style. And then if you look on the other side, you're going to understand how the beginning and the ending concludes with the action, and so there really is that alignment in the standards. And so, they knew how important the reciprocal relationship was. And again, just something to keep in mind as we are explicitly teaching all of these discrete skills, is to think about that big picture and how they're all connected to one another.
Yep, absolutely. That's what I was just thinking in my brain, as far as like, we've kind of presented this here as like the sub skills and isolation, but really being aware of how aligning what we're teaching students about decoding and encoding at the word level, right? And showing them those relationships and how that knowledge supports growth and application in each, but then bringing it from that micro level to the macro of, what we're seeing and reading about in text, and then what we're going to write about in producing and generating our own text. It's just so aligned. And I know when I was teaching small children, I don't know that I always did a great job of being really explicit with them about making those connections. And do you see how reading this helps you write it, and vice versa, in a way that I really wish I had done that. I thought I just wanted to be a magical teacher, and then they would like make those connections themselves. And but it's really important that we're explicit and specific about that across all of our instruction and practice. I didn't mean to just interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. I was just going to say, we have to jot down your new learning, but maybe we can just fold that into questions and comments, just kind of open up the floor of, new ideas that you've thought of today, or questions that you have about what we've presented, or anything else.
Well, I would like to say that I appreciated the explanation, the clarity on the explanation of what constitutes the relationship between understanding of how phonics develops and how you apply this knowledge to decode, and how you apply this knowledge to write down the sounds that and connect them with the symbol and then put it in writing. And that's where working memory comes into play. And that's something that we also forget, because the brain um, has that capacity and limited capacity. That's why I appreciated the comment about that cognitive overload that so many people have spoken about. But it has to do with automaticity and understanding how phonics works. But then it also has to do with the ability of the child to say the sounds, connect the sound with the letter, remember the strokes for that letter formation, write them in the order that they managed to decode them, and then review for self-regulation. And that is so much work. And it does require application, but also it requires that automaticity building.
Mhm.
So yes, it's important to have a very strong oral language early on. So that phonemic awareness piece that you addressed, that was excellent to clearly see the value of this, and then connecting the sound with the letter for the students to be able to do this type of manipulation, because it does have a lot of work. And there is, there is the work by Connor too on segmenting to spell. But what is the idea? If I'm not fluent in my ability to do full phoneme segmentation, I am not able really to stretch the sounds, connect the sound with a letter to record it. So we see often children saying bad. I just made the word, right? Mat. I'll say mat instead of bad. Mat. At. And then they go to write, right? And they will say, mm, and then they forgot what was the other thing. So it's nice to teach these practices that we know that the applications that we know that they have evidence behind. So segmenting to spell will require that stretching, math, while I'm writing the and write the t. So it's and this is where the two marry, and one supports the other and build from one another. So I appreciated that clarity in the explanation of the relationships between those two. Thank you.
Thank you. Clarity is not something people usually say, or we don't get that a lot, that we're clear on things. I'm just kidding. But no, all I've been thinking, like, going when we were developing this presentation, I'd always think back to, like, it's not rocket science. It's like, no, it's harder, right? I think there was a book a long time ago, like, teaching is rocket science. It's like, no, or teaching reading is rocket science. It's like, no, it's so much harder than that, because there's so much involved. And then I think another key to that too is, like, the exposure, right? Like, we think, oh, well, we can spend a day on the at family, or we can do this one particular skill for a week. And it's like, absolutely not. Like, kids need, I don't mean to say kids, like, all literacy learners need multiple exposures to these things, like, in isolation, in context, in their own production, and teacher production, and peer production. And it's it's a lot. Yes.
Right. Right. And you mentioned this connection and application in context, in authentic context that will be meaningful for them as well. And application in writing can be meaningful for them. And
Yes.
even the practice sometimes, um, working with primary grades teachers, we see that they avoid in a way the dictation task, because they think it's not writing, but dictation is really writing. You're supporting application Nora language for children to, in a way, internalize these patterns of speech and patterns of writing. So it's important context, and context in the early grades, it can be simply as such mapping speech to print. And
Yeah,
that's how basic it can be, but needed in the primary grades.
absolutely. I agree so much.
That's why we're in the same department. We all agree.
Yes, right, right, right. Yes. Any other questions? Anybody else want to, like, flatter us? I'm just kidding.
think for me, this was just really timely because we're in the middle of the year assessment window. And so just a good reminder of knowing what to do with the data that I collect and not just collecting it and reporting it to my district. I was looking at some sight word data today and really trying to figure out which words are my kids consistently missing and is there a pattern. And I realized a lot of them are missing the blends and digraphs. So that's something I need to go back and cover. Even though it's a sight word, it's tripping them up in a way, as well as the connection you mentioned between decoding and encoding and how it's reciprocal, because we've really focused a lot on phonics, but we tend to focus on it a lot like orally, and they're hearing it and they're verbally producing it and they're decoding it. But then I was looking at some writing and I was like, oh, we haven't really picked that up totally yet, you know? So just remembering to take it backwards the other way as well. So that was just really good reminders. And yes, so thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad. I'm a spelling nerd. I love all things spelling. I love all things orthographic knowledge. So I'm so happy. I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, I really like reading too, but spelling's just cool.
Right, but that's what research shows, that if you
Mhm.
integrate spelling with reading interventions,
Yep.
the benefits on children are much higher.
Yeah.
So it seems that this is a challenge, and perhaps it's because we tend to have decontextualized or boxed, I would say, the instruction of grammar and spelling and writing and reading without trying to break these boxes and the walls between those boxes, because literacy is not limited within a space. And that's what really affects students' ability to transfer. That's why we see them being able to do a specific task at the beginning of the day, but not apply the same the next hour, because everything is so contextualized, and we not contextualized, I should say they are so in a limited space and application without allowing the learner to see the application across contexts. So yes, it is interesting to see this, but again, there are programs and there are approaches and there is research that shows that integrated instruction has far more effects, and then also writing instruction has effects in reading, besides reading having effects in writing.
Absolutely. Well, we have just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to move us along so we don't run out of time for another commercial break. So Jennifer and I will be back again next week. Get very excited because you're never going to get rid of us. I'm just kidding. But so we are going to dive deeper and really get into developmental word study. So thinking about spelling instruction and thinking about phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, and what educators and parents can do to support those, support development in those areas. And again, as always, connected to authentic practice and reading and writing that can also support growth in those areas. So, and Jennifer and I will share some work we've done in a local second grade classroom, and with very similar effects to what Dr. Philippakos is talking about with that reading and writing and spelling connection. And Megan, same thing as you're talking about there too, thinking about the importance of making those connections. And so I'm going to drop this, whoops. I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to drop this link in the chat for a form here. If you don't mind to fill it out for us, just kind of some feedback on our session, other questions that may come up, anything goes really, if you just kind of check it out. And then our website it's up and running, I believe. It's still very much under construction, but we're getting it there. blood, sweat, and tears, I think. But we will have that up and running, and our virtual series will continue through the next several months. And then, we're always available via email. So.
Yes, the literacy specialist website will be soon up and running. Currently, our literacy studies is up and running, but we are fortunate to have our separate
Yes.
world because we literacy rock.
Yes. You're doing all the things.
We are doing everything.
Yes. But yes, thank you all so much. Megan, it was great to see you again. Best of luck through mid-year assessments. I hope you have lots of chocolate or whatever floats your boat on hand to get you through that. So, and thank you, Dr. Filipakos. It was great to see you. And thank you, Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. And I would like to say that we had one more attendee reach the end of the session, unfortunately. So perhaps it was a time challenge, but their sessions are recorded. They will be edited. I promise that. And they will be on our website. So if you missed the session, don't worry. It will be available later at another time. It will be on our website, and we'll have an announcement for that so everyone will have access.
Okay, perfect. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.